When your child freezes, cries, or suddenly shuts down after you yell, do you actually know what's happening inside their brain? Most people think children are just being dramatic, sensitive, or difficult. But behind that frustrating moment, there's something much deeper that almost nobody talks about. It's one of the most emotionally loaded experiences a developing brain can have. And if you misunderstand what's happening, which most exhausted parents accidentally do, you might miss what your child is really trying to tell you. Because when a child is yelled at, they aren't just hearing your words. They're learning something about safety, about relationships, and eventually, about themselves. Let's start with what being yelled at really means to a child's brain. 1. The biggest myth: they aren't ignoring you. Have you ever yelled at your child and noticed them staring at the floor? Or maybe they burst into tears. Maybe they completely stop responding. You probably thought they were ignoring you. You probably assumed they weren't listening. But here's what's actually happening. The moment a child perceives a threat, their brain shifts priorities. Learning moves into the background. Protection moves to the front. What looks like defiance is often overload. Their nervous system becomes flooded. Their body becomes focused on surviving the emotional storm rather than understanding the lesson. Think about that for a second. The behavior you wanted to correct becomes almost impossible to process because their brain is now focused on managing fear. And by the way, if your child becomes unusually quiet after being yelled at, don't brush it off. We'll come back to what that can mean later, and it may completely change how you view good behavior. 2. Your child's brain goes into alarm mode. Here's what's actually happening inside their developing brain. A landmark body of developmental neuroscience research has shown that children's brains are highly sensitive to emotional signals from caregivers. When a parent suddenly raises their voice, the brain's threat detection system becomes activated. Heart rate increases. Stress hormones rise. Attention narrows. The brain begins asking one question: am I safe? You think you're delivering information, but your child's brain may be processing danger. Researchers studying child development have repeatedly observed that high emotional stress reduces a child's ability to absorb information and learn in the moment. That's why children often repeat the same mistake after being yelled at. Not because they don't care, but because the lesson never fully reached the part of the brain responsible for reflection and self-control. Think about that. Your child isn't choosing between listening and not listening. Their brain may be choosing between learning and survival. And here's where the science gets even more fascinating. The younger the child, the more they depend on your nervous system to tell them whether the world is safe. Which brings us to something most exhausted parents never realize. 3. Your child is borrowing your nervous system. Have you ever noticed how a child can be completely calm one moment and suddenly become distressed when an adult becomes angry? You probably thought they were simply reacting to the volume. But here's what's actually happening. Children use caregivers as emotional anchors. Developmental psychologists call this co-regulation. Before children can regulate their own emotions, they borrow yours. Your calm becomes their calm. Your panic becomes their panic. Your nervous system becomes the instruction manual for theirs. This is why your child behaves differently with you than with strangers. You are not just another person in their environment. You are their emotional home base. Think about that for a second. When your child looks at you after making a mistake, they aren't only looking for discipline. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for clues about how big the danger really is. What makes this even more meaningful is that these moments become building blocks for future emotional resilience. Every time you help them move from fear back to safety, you're teaching their brain a skill they'll use for the rest of their life. And hey, if this is changing how you see the baby in your life, hit like and subscribe. It helps us reach more exhausted parents who need to know that what they are doing actually matters. 4. This reaction is older than civilization. Here's something remarkable. The fear response your child experiences when confronted with anger isn't new. It's ancient. Long before schools existed. Long before modern families existed. Human infants survived because they stayed emotionally connected to caregivers. In early human history, separation from protective adults could be deadly. Evolution rewarded babies and children who paid close attention to emotional signals from parents. A raised voice, an angry expression, a a sudden change in tone. These signals mattered. And deep inside the human brain, they still do. This is where the traditional parenting advice gets it completely wrong. Many people assume children are being manipulative, but often, they are responding exactly the way evolution designed them to respond. Their brain is asking, is my connection to the person keeping me safe still secure? Think about that. The emotional intensity isn't weakness. It's survival software that has been running for thousands of generations. 5. Every moment is building their future brain. Now let's talk about something incredible. Your child isn't just experiencing these interactions. They're using them to build future abilities. Cognitive science shows that emotional experiences shape developing neural pathways. Every time a child successfully moves through frustration, disappointment, or correction with support, their brain practices emotional regulation. This skill becomes the foundation for patience, problem solving, self-control, healthy relationships, even academic success. You probably thought discipline was mostly about behavior. But here's what's actually happening. Your child is learning how to handle emotions. They're learning how to respond when life becomes difficult. They're learning how to treat themselves during mistakes. Think about that for a second. Years from now, the voice inside your child's head may sound surprisingly similar to the voices they heard growing up. And that's why these moments matter so much. Not because parents must be perfect, but because children are always learning from the emotional environment around them. 6. What most parents never realize. This is the part that changes everything. Remember earlier when I mentioned the child who becomes unusually quiet? This is exactly what I was talking about. Many parents worry about children who act out, but some of the deepest emotional struggles belong to children who stop expressing themselves entirely. The child who says, "It's okay." The child who never complains. The child who never asks for help. The child who becomes easy. You probably think they've learned the lesson. But here's what's actually happening. Some children learn that emotions create conflict, so they begin hiding them. Some learn that mistakes lead to shame, so they stop taking risks. Some learn that their feelings are inconvenient, so they stop sharing them. Think about that for a second. The goal of healthy discipline isn't silence. It's understanding. It's helping a child learn while still feeling emotionally safe. Because the deepest lesson children take from these moments is rarely about the broken rule. It's about what they believe their worth is when they make mistakes. And that belief can follow them for decades. 7. When should parents pay closer attention? Let's be clear. Every parent loses patience sometimes. Every parent has difficult days. This isn't about perfection. But here's what pediatric researchers encourage parents to watch for. If a child consistently becomes emotionally withdrawn, stops making eye contact, seems fearful of making even small mistakes, or appears unusually anxious around adult reactions, those can be signs that extra support may be needed. Not panic, not guilt, just attention. Early support changes outcomes dramatically. And trust your instincts. You know your child better than anyone else. If something feels off, it's always worth exploring further with a qualified professional. Because when it comes to children's emotional development, early intervention changes everything. So let's go back to the question we started with. What happens when you yell at your child? In neurological terms, their brain may shift into protection mode. In evolutionary terms, an ancient survival system becomes activated. In emotional terms, they're looking to you to help them find safety again. That's not a child being dramatic. That's not a child trying to make your life difficult. That's a developing human brain learning how relationships work, learning how emotions work, learning what it means to be safe. So the next time your child freezes, cries, argues, or becomes silent after being yelled at, remember, there is much more happening beneath the surface than you can see. And that moment, it was never meaningless, and it shouldn't be to you either. You are doing a great job.